On Thursday, the 23rd of April, I joined other members of the European Council by video conference to discuss the coronavirus emergency and to chart a path towards economic and social recovery. This was the fourth such meeting, with previous meetings having taken place on the 10th, 17th and 26th of March. I welcome the opportunity to provide an account of these meetings to the Dáil and to exchange views and ideas with members. Sadly, when this emergency started, the level of coordination across the European Union was poor. Member States did their own thing, very often because they were responding to a pandemic that was happening at a different pace in different countries. And of course, as we all know, public health is a national, not a European competence. At its best, the European Union stands for freedom, peace and solidarity, and a belief that we can achieve something greater by acting together as a continent. Europe showed what these values meant recently during the first phase of the Brexit negotiations, and now must do so again during this pandemic. We must have a coordinated response based on solidarity and demonstrate that the European ideal shines brightest when things are at their darkest. In our meetings, the European Council has focused on 5 strategic areas of work where we believe cooperation is essential. First, limiting the spread of the virus. Second, ensuring the supply of medicines, equipment and goods. Third, supporting research. Fourth, alleviating the socio-economic consequences for our people. And fifth, cooperating to bring citizens home from other countries. At our meeting on the 23rd of April, we welcomed in particular the joint European roadmap towards the lifting of COVID-19 containment measures. This was published by the Commission on the 15th of April. It sets out a principles-based and science-led approach to reopening our societies and economies. This was widely welcomed and aligns with the approach that we've taken as a government to date. Across Europe, our first responsibility and our highest responsibility has been to protect the lives and health of our citizens. We see this in the Commission's work on a shared procurement framework for PPE and other medical supplies, EU research funding for the development of effective diagnostics and therapeutics, as well as a coordinated approach to working towards an effective vaccine for SARS-CoV-2. I welcome that the European Commission is building a strategic stockpile of medical equipment from which Member States will be able to draw in future and indeed in the near present. In fact, batches of FFP2 protective masks were distributed from this stock in recent days to Spain, Italy and Croatia. There is more to do, and we need to consider how to make the European Union more resilient and more responsive as we chart our way through and beyond this crisis. At our first meeting, we agreed to coordinate the repatriation of our citizens stranded across the globe as a result of the pandemic. To date, repatriation efforts have brought over 500,000 EU citizens back to their home countries. These include people repatriated to Ireland on special flights we chartered from Peru and India, which citizens of 17 other countries also travelled on, and indeed we've availed of the reverse from other countries. We agreed on the 17th of March that we'd do whatever it takes to meet the current challenges, to restore our confidence and to support a rapid recovery. So we invited the Eurogroup of EU finance ministers to scrutinise economic and financial developments and adopt a coordinated policy approach. The President of the European Central Bank, Madame Christine Lagarde, has participated in each of these meetings, and she strongly supported our position that we need to provide monetary flexibilities to protect the European economy, at least in the initial stages of this economic crisis. The crisis has had deep and sharp economic and social impacts, which everyone in the House will be well aware of. We've already seen the stresses and strains across all countries of the European Union, and some more so than others have been particularly affected. At our meeting on the 26th of March, we discussed how we can best respond to this crisis collectively. Together we must deal with the immediate issues arising and drive our recovery into the medium and longer term and ensure that it is sustainable. Before that meeting, I joined 8 of my colleagues in advancing an approach that would have led to the mutualisation of debt, known in shorthand as corona bonds. The idea was to take a shared approach to managing debt arising solely from this crisis. This could be spending directed towards our health services, or wider spending that governments have to undertake in order to protect their welfare states, and refloat their economies. Such an approach would have required a legal underpinning not currently provided for in the European treaties, and I accept that it would have taken a long time to agree this, even more if it had to be approved in all member states, and even more if some, including ours, required a referendum. But it was still worth exploring. In the absence of unanimous support for that approach, we agreed that alternative solutions for a recovery fund should be developed. And I have to say I'm supportive of the broad suite of measures taken at EU level. These include a temporary relaxation of state aid rules, under which Ireland has 2 aid packages totalling €400 million approved by the Commission to assist our most affected companies. However, we need to ensure that Member States don't use state aid to give an unfair advantage to companies in other Member States that they compete with. And this is something we're going to watch very closely. We've also invoked the escape clause in the Stability and Growth Pact to give Member States additional flexibility to spend and borrow more in response to this crisis. We all appreciate this cannot go on forever, but it is appropriate that we do so at this particular point in the cycle. The European Central Bank has also played an important role in ensuring stability in the middle of this extraordinary crisis, including through its €750 billion pandemic emergency purchase programme. Capital rules for banks have also been eased to ensure that they can lend into the real economy, providing liquidity to businesses under pressure. At our meeting on the 23rd of April, we endorsed an economic package agreed by the Eurogroup, worth up to €500 billion, and we asked that it be operational in the first week in June. The package contains 3 elements. First, a €100 billion EU SURE instrument, which will provide financial assistance in the form of loans granted on favourable terms to cover initiatives such as short-term work schemes and similar measures for the self-employed. This would include, for example, our temporary wage subsidy scheme. A €200 billion EIB COVID-19 guarantee fund for crisis lending to SMEs, mid-caps and corporates, underpinned by €25 billion in Member States. And a €240 billion ESM-operated pandemic crisis support instrument to provide a backstop for Member States to make available sovereign funding of up to 2% of GDP for direct and indirect healthcare expenditures. It should be noted that these are all loans and guarantees and are not grants, and borrowed money must be repaid. Taken together, these 3 measures represent an EU fiscal response of over €500 billion, as I mentioned earlier, an historic level deployment of resources to respond to an emergency of unprecedented levels, and a much greater and more appropriate response from the European Union than we saw during the financial crisis 10 or 12 years ago, when the European Union acted in a way that was too little and too late. Looking beyond the immediate crisis, we agreed the need to put in place a recovery fund to rebuild our economies, reopen our businesses, and get our citizens back to work. We also welcomed the joint roadmap for recovery and asked the Presidents of the European Commission and Council to bring it forward. It also sets out a framework for collective action towards recovery, including a fully functioning single market, an unparalleled investment effort, and a commitment to the European Union playing its part in driving a global recovery. As a necessary next step to this work, we welcome the European Commission's proposal that it undertake a sector-by-sector analysis of the economic impact of the crisis and to identify and target supports necessary for recovery for those particular sectors. We also agreed that climate action and the digital economy should be critical components of this recovery plan. This crisis has dealt a terrible shock to our economies, but also creates an opportunity to make sure that the recovery European-wide is climate-proofed and technology-driven. I believe that the EU budget, the MFF, is the most obvious vehicle for doing this. So I've asked the Commission to look again at the MFF proposal and to consider how it and the Recovery Fund should be linked. As is well known, there were strongly held different views around the table on how this should be financed. Some believe there should be transfers from other countries to those countries most affected in the form of grants. Generally speaking, a transfer from north to south. Others expressed the view that loans were the only acceptable option to their citizens and also the legal order of their nations and their constitution. I articulated the view that both could play a part and that the right balance between loans and grants is what we should aim for. I also argued that I couldn't accept any approach that deployed the MFF to the detriment of proper funding of the Common Agricultural Policy, or CAP. Farming and agribusiness in the food sector was already facing great challenges and has been deeply affected by this crisis. Successful and well-functioning programmes such as CAP, Cohesion and Horizon will help drive our recovery and therefore should be funded properly for the next 7 years. At this time of crisis, we see the strategic importance of a strong agri-food sector, providing European citizens with food security and affordable food. CAP is needed now more than ever, perhaps as much as it was needed when it was first invented. During this emergency, we've seen huge stresses on the single market, as some internal borders closed to people, goods and services, albeit temporarily. As was predictable, countries that closed their borders and introduced export bans had to reverse them within weeks, when they learned very quickly that the benefits were less than the costs. I believe a fully functioning single market and free trade beyond our borders will be necessary as we recover from the recession induced by COVID-19. In her wrap-up statement, Minister McEntee will discuss the package of measures being taken at EU level to support partner countries globally. As part of the European Union's global effort, over 3.3 billion of EU financial support has been mobilised for the Western Balkans for COVID-19 and the post-pandemic recovery. This is our neighbourhood, and it's the right thing that we should help them. Later this afternoon, I'll participate in a Western Balkans summit with EU leaders and heads of government from the Western Balkan states. This will also be done by video conference, so I apologise that I have to leave this session early in order to take part in that. Finally, Ceann Comhairle, on Saturday we mark Europe Day, and I believe this date should serve as a reminder of what we've achieved together. The European Union is held together by its values: respect for democracy, the rule of law, individual freedom, equality before the law, our unique model, which is the social market economy, and the four freedoms. It should also remind us that so many of the problems and challenges that we face don't recognise borders drawn by mankind, whether it's health emergencies like pandemics, environmental emergencies like climate change, security threats like international terrorism, or global economic movements. The pooling of resources and the creation of safety nets and the adoption of collective measures are necessary to drive our recovery. This is particularly important for small countries like Ireland, with a population of only 5 million. Our best hope for the future lies in working together, being at that top table in the European Union, and making sure that we're at the heart of the common European home that we help to build. I welcome the views and thoughts of members today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Taoiseach.